In a previous lecture, you learned how to create arrays and access the values stored in a PHP array using either the index or the name key. And also we saw how to display both the keys and the values using var_dump or the print arrow function. In this lecture, you will learn a handful of tricks and techniques for working with arrays in PHP. In most cases, we want to use the value of an array to do something important inside of our programs. We don't want to display var_dump or print arrow inside of our programs. In that case, we either want to loop through the values stored in an array and then display them in an unordered list or in any other form that is useful to the user of our application. I have a colors array here in my text editor. Now to loop through this array, PHP gives us a little function which is called for each. This function allows me to take an array and then access each of the elements in this array, and then within the loop I can then do something with each of the elements. So I say for each color as, and then I just store this in another variable called this color. So the colors here is the array that we have on top, okay, which contains 3 elements, red, blue, and green. And then the color here, singular, represent each item in this list. So we are saying for each item in this list, I want you to do what is between these curly braces. For each item in this list, I want you to echo and then the value. If we do a refresh on the browser now, see that we have a list of all the elements in that array. So this is a very handy function for us to loop through all the values in an array and then perform any operation that we want to perform on each of the specific elements. Now, something very important to take note of is how do you decide, because in the last lecture we talked about index-based arrays and associative arrays, and if you remember, for index-based arrays, PHP will automatically assign numbers representing the index of the array, while for associative array, we assign keys to the array. So these keys are useful for us to identify what this particular value is inside of this array. So how do you decide either to allow PHP to assign keys to your array or you assigning keys by yourself? The example that we have here is a perfect example for index-based array. Let's consider another example. So we're going to create another array here called the students. And in this array, I'm just going to store the name of the student. So call the student John Doe. And then John Doe is studying software engineering. So we say his course is software engineering. And then is 32 years old. His grade is 3.7. And then is currently in level 200. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to loop through students this time. So this should be just a single student. So we say the attributes of this student. And then we display the attribute in a list item. So let's refresh the browser. You can already see that it requires more details for someone to understand this output. John Doe, okay, I can know that this is the name of a person. Software engineering, I can imagine, okay, this is a course, but what is 32? What is 3.7 and what is 200? So even if we were to display the index along with the result, like so, we want to display the index, so we can actually just say values. So what this means is for each of the values here inside of this student array, I want the key and I also want the value. So the name doesn't matter, but just for clarity, we say key and then value. So if we display the key here and then we say values, the arrow here can be anything. So we can actually use a column here. It doesn't really matter. And then we do a refresh on the browser. See, even if we do this, it still doesn't make sense. So this is a perfect candidate for associative arrays, so that at first glance, when someone looks at the output, they know exactly what you are trying to do. So let's make this right. So come here, instead of allowing PHP to assign index for us, I'm going to say the key for this is name and the value is John Doe. The key for this will be course and the value is software engineering. Then the key for this will be age. The value is 32. Key for this will be grade. Then the value is 3.7. And then the key for this will be level. Then the value is 200. Okay, let's do a refresh now. Now you can see that it is very easy for someone to see this and know exactly what you're doing. You don't need to explain what you're doing here. Whoever sees this knows that, oh, this represents a particular student. This is his name. He's studying software engineering. His age 32. His current grade is 3.7 and is currently a second year student. So this is very important for clarity. Situation like this, we need to use associative arrays. Whereas if we just want to display a list of items like a list of food, then we can actually just allow PHP to assign indices to our arrays. At this level, it's still very simple to display the values stored in the array that we have here. So what if we have a multi-dimensional array, an array that contains other arrays? I'm going to show you now how to display values stored in a multi-dimensional array. Here we're going to say we have a list of students, no longer one student, but we have many students. So I'm just going to take this and then put it inside of another array. So you can say array and then paste this here. And then I can just duplicate this line, then change the values in here. Okay, so now I'm going to change these to students. If we attempt to do this right now, we are actually going to get an error. Let me refresh the browser. And here we see array to string conversion. Because if you look at the code here, we're just trying to echo out the value. Remember from previous lecture, I told you that we cannot use echo on an array. We either use var_dump or we use the printr function to display the value of an array. So I'm going to come here and just echo h2 tag to say this is a list of students. All right, so let's look at this array again. We have a multi-dimensional array here, students, which contains array of students. So what we want to do here, let's give this guy a new name, Kerry. So what we want to do here is actually loop through the outer array, which is the students, and then have another loop to loop through the inner arrays. Start with an unordered list. So let me put this here and then close it. So let's say we want to do this for each of the elements in this array. So right here, when we get here, this value is going to be an array. That's why we got an error previously when we tried to use this line echo to echo out the key and the value, because this was actually an array. So what we need to do is actually loop through that other array. So we're going to say for each, and this time it's going to be value as, let's say this should be the attribute, and then the value. So we have an array here. For each of the elements of this array, which is also an array, we want to do another for each. So we're going to loop through this array and then take the key and then take the value. So what we want to do with the key and the value, we just want to echo them out in a list. So take this and then replace it with this, and then this should become var. And then this, I just want to change it to this symbol. Okay, so finally, let's put an horizontal line here to differentiate each of the elements. So we're going over to the browser now to do a refresh. Then you can see that we have each of the items inside of the array. So this is how we display the values in a multi-dimensional array. Okay, just a quick walkthrough again. Okay, we have the students array here, and then inside of the student array, we have 3 other arrays. So when we call it for each function on the students array, the value returned to us is going to be an array. And then for this array, we cannot use echo. So what we need to do is to use another for each loop within this first for each loop to then do the same thing. It's like repeating the exact same thing that we are doing on the students for this value. So here we say values as attribute and then the value. So which means this will be the attribute and then this will be the value. This will be the attribute and this will be the value. This will be the attribute and this will be the value, and so on. So we just display them in an unordered list. Now there's just one more issue with this code. The problem is that the code assumes that every item inside of this array is an array, which is true in this case. So if I add one more element which is not an array, so I say name is equal to Terry. This is just one element in the student's array. So if we attempt to execute now, PHP is going to give us a warning error. Let's see this on the browser. You can see invalid argument specified for each on line 15. Exactly, because what I have passed in here is not an array, but just an element to this outer student array here. So how do we fix this problem? To fix this, we need a way to determine, because the error is actually coming from line 15. If I open the browser again, you can see it tells me the error is coming from line 15. And then if I look at line 15 in my code, I can see that I'm actually trying to access another array, but whereas this is not an array, the value on line 8 is not an array, it's just an element inside of the student's array. So to solve this problem, we need a way to ask PHP, is this value an array? If this value is an array, that is only when we are going to do the order for each that we have here. So let me quickly show you how to do that. Remember from previous lecture, I've already taught you that we use the isType construct to determine what type a variable is. If is array value. So we are essentially saying here, if value is an array, that is only when we are going to do all the things inside of this for loop. Otherwise, we're just going to echo out the key. In this case, it's coming from the outer for loop and then the value 2. So this way we are able to handle that situation where one of the item inside of this array is not an array. So if we do a refresh on the browser now, you can see that we're actually able to display that item without getting an error. Okay, great. This problem is solved, but we still have another problem. Let's say there is another array inside of one of the arrays that we have here. So let's say inside here, we have another array. So we say, oh, let me add it here. Let's say for this student, we want to say there's a collection, which is going to be the next item. For example, collection. And then this is going to be equal to another array. So music and then books. So inside of the third array, we have another array. So this is a 3-dimensional array. So previously it was just a 2-dimensional array. Now what we have is a 3-dimensional array because we have an outer student array. Inside of it we have a student array, and then inside of one of the student array we have a collections array. This is now a 3-dimensional array. This code that we have here would no longer be able to handle this situation. So if I do a refresh, we're going to get an error. See here, notice array to string conversion on line 18. All right, so I'm going to show you how to fix this in a later lecture because we're going to need to learn some other things before we see how to actually fix this kind of a problem. It's pretty easy, just like what we have done here. I'm going to show you how to do that in another lecture.